When we last spoke, you mentioned the need for interdisciplinary teams. What did you mean by that?
So if you want to become a data-driven company, so you want to avoid to take a look at the problem from the same angle over and over and over again. So right now, the biggest problem, in my opinion, in analytics is to have all the white males that do analytics, right? So you try to wiggle that up, try to get in not only computer science, you try to get in maybe mathematics, physics, but also computational psychology, biology, social science like myself. Because everybody comes with a very specific tool set and they see the problem from different angles. So let's say I have a hammer as my tool. Everything I see is a nail. But if I have different tools, people see problems in a different shape, and therefore the probability of solving a problem is greater. So therefore, having a diverse culture from a gender background, from a academic background, from a cultural background is actually critical to be very innovative.
So how do you create a data-driven culture that supports those teams?
That is a good question. Right now we are trying it out, right? It's a work in progress. But I think important things are that you create an open space, open mindset where failure is allowed. And not only allowed, but it's actually part of your learning process. So it's pretty much similar to what you do in academia. When you do research, you eventually fail. It's just a question of time. And in an environment like a banking environment, that failure must be allowed, and it's one of the first important steps to create an open culture. But I mean, it's difficult. It's not an easy answer.
Mm. Within a large organization, how difficult is it to establish a culture of analytics?
I don't think it has something to do with the size of the company. Let's say you take a look at Google or Facebook again. They're large corporations. And I think they're pretty good in data analytics, data-driven corporations. If you take a look at the bank, like for example at Nordlb, it's not so much the size. We're way smaller than them, and still we struggle to bring in the type of talent that we need. I think what is way more critical here is the area of work, or area of industry. Banks are very, very conservative. So the people that we're looking for are pretty much the opposite of conservative, like at least from a mental standpoint. So you have to actually convince them why banking is an interesting area to work for, and that a bank doesn't necessarily need to be what everybody pictures, but it also can be quite a lot of fun.
Mm. Yes, it's difficult to determine what's the best way to attract them, because as you say, the bank is typically known as being very conservative, so it's having to change those perceptions, and I guess you need to get in front of those people first to explain why you're different.
Right, and I don't think anybody wants to have a bank that is very, let's say, progressive in the sense of risk-taking, because you don't want to give their money, your money to them, right? Mm. So most people like a very conservative bank. However, they want to have all the perks that come with an agile environment. So that gap needs to be bridged somehow. That's what you need to try to do.
Do you think fintechs that are emerging into this space are doing this well? Because a lot of them, so like Monzo that we're seeing, and there's lots of different examples that you can use, are portrayed as this new trendy bank, I guess, but they're apps, but they appeal to a younger audience that are less interested in the security of, a big bank that has got years and years of experience that can look after their mortgage and their loans and everything. How do you think they've achieved that?
That's a good one. I think it's actually fintechs are very tech savvy, right? And a lot of new customers or younger folks are actually attracted by that tech savviness. They can actually do hip things, sometimes even because they're not constrained by authorities or regulations, because maybe sometimes they don't have a bank, they just appear as a forwarder to a bank, like for when it comes for credit, for example. On the other hand side, also when they are successful, they run pretty quick in the problem that they cannot scale anymore. So that's where they often then cooperate with the old banking industry.
Yeah.
And then when they both actually cooperate, that's where the magic all of a sudden happens, because both can actually benefit from that.
Yeah. So what do you see for the future of fintechs and incumbents? Do you see acquisition, collaboration, or a mixture of the two?
I think that actually the mix of the two. Like we as a bank, we actually invested in quite a few fintechs, and some people might think, well, why you do that? Like, why you're raising your own competitors? But on the other hand side, well, we can learn from them, and if it's really so critical, well, we can still buy them. And if it's not that critical, we still can cooperate with them. So I think it's not one or the other. I think some will be acquired, some will be just a cooperation, and some things will just not work. But that's what I said at the beginning. Well, we have to learn while doing it. So we'll fail a couple of times. Everybody will. But that's just part of it.
So how big a role does data play in delivering the best customer experience?
Traditionally, or back in the day, what companies did was they created focus groups, right? So they gave them a product and like, hey, here, what do you think about it? And the focus groups were in a room, had a cup of coffee, and then took a look at the product. The problem is that you take out the customer out of their normal habitat. Means like, yes, you get kind of an insight, but this insight might be actually biased, and it's actually very likely biased because that's not the normal environment where they interact with your product. So it is actually way smarter to do the observation or product testing in the space where your customers actually are. And then like you follow them for a while and see how do they interact actually. Do they like if the button is red, or do they like it more when the button is blue, like this typical A/B testing. What happens there is you can scale it up to a way bigger sample, and you can randomize it, and the customers you observe are actually in their normal environment. That means that you get a better picture, a more exact picture of how they interact with your product. But that only can be done through analytics. Therefore, analytics is actually the key to build a good customer experience.
So you talked a lot about the opportunities. What would you say are the key challenges around creating that data-driven culture and customer experience?
I think there are two main barriers. So one barrier is politics, at least in Europe. Like GDPR is probably one thing that everybody knows, at least in the banking sector. But on the other hand side, there's also an institutional point where if we want to use analytics, we have to be more explicit when it comes to rules, when it comes to tasks. Like for example, if you have a rule to whom you give money, you can say, well, I give money to people that are established in the market as a company. Well, an algorithm cannot really understand what exactly does established in the market mean. If you, on the other hand, say, that company has to have a market share of X or has to have at least X number of customers. That is something an algorithm can understand. Right now, however, the rules are typically the first. We have to get to the ladder for algorithm to take place.
What are your thoughts about the future of AI within banking?
I think they will play a significant role. Maybe not in the next 1 or 2 years, but certainly within, I don't know, the next 5 to 10, because AIs or machine learning algorithms make the work way more efficient. Like things that needed 20 people to assess credits, for example, all of a sudden can be done with 3 or 4. So it means like the algorithm take over for a good chunk of people. So you have 2 options. Either you can reduce the size of a company, or you can increase the amount of credits that you give out. But that's up to the CEO to decide which path they want to go.
Okay, I think that's covered barriers as well, really, hasn't it? Because it's up to the bank which way they want to go. I guess it's what you do with the employees within the bank that's a barrier, isn't it? Your staffing choices.
I mean, yes, yes. Staffing is one of the barriers in sense of, well, you need a different employee.
Yeah.
You have to have an employee that not necessarily need to be able to program, but have to understand what does it mean for a computer, what does it mean for algorithm. So it doesn't need to necessarily need to be capable. It doesn't need to be a data scientist, but has to be able to understand what's behind that and be able to cooperate with this machine learning algorithms. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us.